Story 1. My father, my only parent, passed away unexpectedly in 2023. He took his own life. I knew I couldn't recover or manage the logistics of settling his estate during 3 days of bereavement leave. So I quit the job I had held for almost a decade. I had no idea what was next. I just knew I needed time to grieve and heal. I took a month off and then applied last minute to return to the college I had dropped out of 12 years earlier. I had always promised him I would finish my degree, and it felt like a now or never moment. I received nearly a full scholarship and am graduating in less than a month with a 4.0 GPA. My senior capstone project focused on the need for more compassionate bereavement leave. It was terrifying going back in my 30s after so long away, but it was the best thing I could have done for myself. I just landed my post-graduation job today. I never thought this was possible or where I would be after the lowest point of my life, but I know he would be so proud. Story 2. I quit my job and went to bed. In the morning, I woke up to a text message from a place I applied to 3 months ago, which I completely forgot about and thought would never happen. It was surprising because I expected them to call right away, not weeks or months later. Story 3. Through some unfortunate circumstances, I got blamed for a manager's poor decision and was let go without being officially informed. The company often engaged in this practice, telling employees there was no work at the moment and that they would call back in a few days or weeks when business picked up. This sometimes happened legitimately, but it was also a tactic used to avoid telling people they were being let go, and many would never receive a call back. They initially did this to me. After a week, they realized nobody else could perform my job, so they called me back. I only understood what had happened when other employees expressed surprise at my return and informed me they had been told I was fired. Upon realizing their intentions, I quit on the spot and left. By that time, I had a good amount of savings, so I traveled overseas for a few months to stay with my long-distance boyfriend. He ended up proposing to me, and when I returned to my country, a relative offered me a job that I excelled in. Eventually, my fiancée moved to my country, and we got married. If I hadn't quit that job, I probably wouldn't have taken that trip, and the relationship likely wouldn't have lasted. Story 4. After resigning from a job I had lost interest in, I eventually started my own business. This lasted for 32 years, and I am now retired. Story 5. I would be terrified, but my friend quit her retail job with no plan and started a baking business. Now she is thriving, selling at local markets and online. Story 6. I have a good story to share. I quit my job as a website manager for a large university due to ongoing disagreements about my contract. After leaving, I went to a bar where I had been playing guitar on weekends for a while and sat by myself enjoying a beer. It was around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. At about 4:30, the bar owner, whom I had known for years and who had heard me play at his venues for a long time, came in. He asked me why I wasn't working, and I told him I had just quit. Without missing a beat, he said, "Great, now you can work for me." He hired me as his entertainment manager across several venues he owned, which included my playing gigs and some additional hosting. I did that job for almost 13 years until the pandemic made it untenable. To summarize, I quit a job that was becoming unbearable, stayed unemployed for about 45 minutes, and landed the best job I've ever had. Story 7. I was 20, a month into a new job, still in the training phase according to the company handbook. I worked for a Coca-Cola vendor stocking different stores. It was November and Thanksgiving was in about a week. I hadn't seen anyone to train me in 2 weeks and was handed a pallet load of displays to set up with no instructions. It took me a day and a half to get everything done. I was working away when the manager approached me and started shouting about how slow I was on the sales floor in a Walmart. I left her to finish and walked away. I went back to the home office and waited for her to show up. When she walked into the middle of the cubicles to go to her office, I confronted her. I shouted at her loudly in front of everyone about how unprofessional it was to berate a new employee with no training in public. She tried to say, "Let's go into my office," but I interrupted her, saying, "Now that you look bad, you want to go somewhere private? I don't think so. All these people need to hear what you did." She then said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know who you were." I responded, Do you think it's okay to talk that way to anyone? Did you learn your manners from a goat? At this point, the other employees were intently avoiding eye contact, and she was trying to shrink into the floor. I stated, "Consider this my notice that I quit," said, "Forget you," and walked out. I drove over to Office Max and asked for a job. The manager interviewed me while I filled out an application and sent me for the standard drug screening within an hour of yelling at the manager. I came home and told my parents, and they just laughed. Story 8. I have quit almost every job I have ever had without a backup plan, and I have always landed okay, if not better. I do not necessarily recommend this for everyone, especially today. During my last job search, I received an offer from a company with people I really liked and wanted to work for. However, I declined the offer because they were not competitive with their salary. People in my life told me I was crazy, and I also lost my unemployment benefits. Not long after, I accepted another offer at a competing company for the same role, with double the base salary and a much better overall compensation plan. I later received a few weeks of back pay on my unemployment benefits upon appeal. All I can say is that you have to know your worth and sometimes bet on yourself. Story 9. You have never truly experienced life until you have done this. Quitting a job you dislike without giving any notice. The sensation of walking out the door, saying goodbye to your coworkers while knowing it is the last time you will see them, is euphoric. Story 10. I worked as a manager in a challenging environment. I was demoted for doing my job and moved to a less desirable shift, ultimately quitting a few weeks later without notice. I contacted a temp agency that day, and 3 days later, I was placed at a great company that allowed me to progress through the departments quickly, learn new skills, and receive compensation and rewards for taking on extra work. I also met my boyfriend there, and he is wonderful. Story 11. I worked at a Bed Bath & Beyond distribution warehouse. It was a soul-crushing place to work. I would lay in bed for hours before work dreading it, hoping to get sick just to avoid going in. On the way to work, I would look at passing cars and trees, contemplating how easy it would be to drift into one to end up in an accident and get out of work. I finally reached my breaking point after being out of work for 6 months due to an injury. I returned, worked for 3 weeks, and realized it was even worse than I remembered. By that time, I had exhausted my savings because workers' compensation was inadequate. It didn't matter. I turned in my badge, told them I quit, and walked out feeling as if a mountain had been lifted off my shoulders. My significant other said she hadn't seen me smile that large since the day I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. I tried working at a poultry plant afterward, but I couldn't stand the scheduling. After that, I moved to security. In 4 years, I went from earning $10 per hour as a security guard to making $100,000 per year as an account manager. I did that for about a year before I became frustrated with the long hours and returned to being a security guard with a different company. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. I rarely work more than 40 hours a week, and I am much happier. Story 12. I quit my job last October and have focused on selling extra items and cashing in on other things I've had for a long time. I don't have a plan, but it's working. I'm not looking for a job. It just has to be the right one. I'm too old to be mistreated, to feel taken advantage of, or to waste time pleasing anyone other than myself and those who are important to me. Story 13. I quit my job as an art director to work on a farm in Hawaii. I followed my heart, and it has not led me astray. You are not defined by your job. Story 14. I chose peace over a paycheck. It was the scariest leap of my life, but somehow, the moment I let go, life made space for something better. Story 15. I returned to work after 2 weeks of medical leave. My boss avoided me for the first 5 hours of the day. When I finally spoke with my boss, they expressed frustration that I had not completed 2 weeks of work before my medical leave. I left that conversation. The next day, I received a call about a job I applied for a few days earlier. I have been at my current job for 4 years. Story 16. Sometimes walking away from what is safe is the first step toward finding what truly makes you feel alive. Taking that leap saved my soul. Story 17. My backup plan currently involves seeing how long I can survive purely on questionable microwave meals and the sheer power of denial. Story 18. I was unemployed for 4 months and returned to my previous job because I wasn't making progress with job interviews during that time. I was then assigned to temporarily care for an old client of mine, whose spouse recommended me for hospice care for one of their business partner's parents. I provided this care for about 4.5 months until their parent passed away. They then hired me as an independent contractor to help manage the administrative tasks of their business. Story 19. I saved my boss because she was unable to manage and deliver the sales and maintenance demands of a large real estate client. I had a finance background but had some experience in software, so I personally developed a plan to provide the best service for the client. As a result, my team's commissions increased due to the streamlined workflow, and my client was thrilled with the 3-month turnaround. However, my boss took all the credit and cut everyone's commission rates. I walked in and asked why. She sidestepped my question and replied that if I couldn't deal with the new changes, I should reconsider my position. I quit on the spot. She stammered and fumbled at my quick departure as I shook hands with my former team and left the building. The client got wind of my situation and hired me the next day. They took the account in-house because they could use the software I rebuilt. My former boss was laid off 3 months later. I later decided that my own venture and software development was more my calling, and over 20 years later, I am still supporting the software as a service platform I rebuilt. Coincidentally, my old boss was hired by another firm that happened to use my platform for their daily operations. Story 20. I quit my software engineering job at a large company primarily due to burnout and stress. I planned to start a business or explore other opportunities but ended up taking 2 years off to rebuild myself. I eventually reconnected with my old boss and rejoined the company with a significant raise in base pay and an improved work-life balance. It's important to consider how you leave a job and aim to do so on good terms, as you never know who might be in a position to help you in the future. Story 21. The company I worked at for 20 years restructured and offered everyone over 50 a severance package. I was 54 and many of my peers chose not to take it, stating that 50-year-olds are essentially unemployable. I accepted the offer and was working again within 3 months. I was hired specifically for my experience and am now mentoring a team of junior engineers. Story 22. My boss was having an affair with the owner and hindered any promotion opportunities to keep me on her team. I quit without a plan and worked at a friend's restaurant for a couple of months. I saw a job opening with a former manager I had left on good terms with a few years back. I reached out and was hired back. After a year and some changes, I applied to an industry-leading company for a job that was the next step in my career and ended up getting a position a level higher than I originally applied for. Now, after 5 years from that unplanned moment, I am with an industry-leading company earning well into 6 figures in a leadership role. It was the best decision I have ever made. Took hard work, perseverance, and a bit of luck. Life is a wild ride. Story 23. I just walked off the job site yesterday morning. I put a post on Facebook and had many people reach out to me with offers. For young individuals who are unsure of what to do, consider getting into the trades. When you are experienced, you will be able to write your own check. Story 24. I'm so glad someone asked this. I really want to know too, especially in the context of today's challenging job market. I did it back in the early 2010s, so it was easy to find another job. I actually chose to be an independent contractor at that time, but nowadays I have never seen it this bad, and I do desperately want to quit my job. The work environment is toxic and making my life difficult. I want to know because a win for one of us is a win for all of us. I want to believe I can succeed out there if I leave this unsatisfactory job. Story 25. I quit and gave a few weeks' notice to meet the savings goal I needed to live on for a few months. On my last day, I got home from work, terrified because reality had set in. That evening, I received a call asking me to start on Monday. I hadn't heard from the interviewers in months. I worked at that company for 12 years and loved it. Story 26. It worked out well. I finished school, got into a better paying career, and was actually able to start my life. I was an office manager at one location of a small local chain of retail stores. I performed basic accounting and miscellaneous tasks that the store manager did not want to handle. It honestly was not bad at all until the store manager made mistakes and found herself in trouble. I started getting blamed for her errors, even if they were not my responsibilities. I just checked and reported the financial records, but her spending was out of control, and she tried to pin it on me every month. One day, I walked in and was informed by the manager that ownership wanted to terminate my employment, but she talked them down to a suspension as a favor. I had enough and told her she should have just let them fire me. I left and never returned. They called me a week later asking why I did not come back from my suspension, as I was only supposed to be gone 3 days. I never responded. Another week went by, and they called to inform me that I was being terminated. I did not respond to that either. Story 27. I was getting tired of my job. No one in the office cared about the company, and they handed me the hardest task: acquiring new customers. I performed better in my 18 months there than anyone in the company's history in my position, yet I received a poor review. They wanted me to write a business plan in 1 week, and they would evaluate whether to keep me after that. This came after they claimed I didn't support my colleagues, which was untrue, and that I didn't work enough unpaid overtime. I decided at 10 a.m. the next day that they were treating me poorly, so I dropped my keys on the boss's desk and resigned. Ironically, the general manager of the site was fired 4 months later, and my boss, who undermined me, was let go just 1 day short of his 10 years to qualify for long service leave. The whole company collapsed about 2 years later, and I was not surprised. Story 28. I was around 26 and working in retail at a camera shop. It wasn't too bad, honestly, but I felt like if I kept working there, I would fall into a pattern of working in retail forever. I believed I could do better, but I needed serious motivation, so I quit. I had about $20,000 in savings to live on because I was a diligent saver, and my expenses were only around $700 per month due to renting a cheap room at the time. A few months later, a friend informed me that his job at a legacy technology company was looking for someone knowledgeable about software testing. While I didn't have experience in that area, I was a consumer electronics enthusiast, which was the product they needed to test. They couldn't find anyone who truly understood their product, but I did, so they surprisingly offered me the job on the spot. This was around 2006 when it was still possible to get a job with a firm handshake and a smile. I was in shock going from making $12 per hour in retail to $20 per hour. In retrospect, that was a low offer, but I didn't really know the industry, so fair enough. They were generous with raises, and I was making $35 per hour by the time our division closed 2 years later. I learned the ins and outs of software testing on the job and built a career out of it. Now I work for a reputable technology company, still in software testing, and I make a very nice living. Story 29. I have done it twice. In my first job, I worked as a retail manager. A district manager and buyer outright told me, "We appreciate your input, but you know we don't care what you think, right?" I submitted my 2-week notice immediately after the call ended. I secured a job within a couple of months after moving in with a few friends. I left my next job much later than I should have, but I left with a stack of cash. I used most of it to survive while obtaining new certifications to start a new career. It took me a year and a half to land an acceptable job where I am currently employed. Story 30. I worked for a chemical plant that was very dangerous, and they violated occupational safety and health administration regulations regularly because they could afford to do so. After 6 months, I decided the pay wasn't worth the risk of dying or being seriously injured, so I quit and used my savings to support myself while I looked for another job. Story 31. I quit my job at Target because my mental health took a bad turn, and the environment there was making it worse. I had no plan. I just had to get out of there quickly. Not long after, my friend, who was the manager at a local small business, offered to hire me. It has been 3 years now, and I am a well-established member of the team. That friend no longer works for the company, and I still love the job. It is the best job I have ever had. My new manager is great, and my coworkers are fantastic. It may sound corny, but we really are a bit like a family. We take care of each other. Story 32. I had a draining job that I loathed with every fiber of my being. I collected bad debt from individuals who couldn't afford it. After 18 months, I quit. Fortunately, my grandparents passed away, leaving me a significant amount as an inheritance. My girlfriend and I decided to drive around the United States to explore what the country had to offer us. That was in 2011. My girlfriend is now my wife and we have children. I have never regretted quitting that job once in my life. I found a better job when I returned home. It took some time, but it happened, and I never looked back. They don't care about you. Focus on yourself. It certainly helps if your grandparents leave you a substantial inheritance. Story 33. I went from testing voltage and circuitry for microinverters that go on the back of solar panels to removing trees and making more money. I am only a month away from forbearance on my mortgage, but I made my mortgage payment in 3 days. So now I am just 1 month away from forbearance. Story 34. I moved in with my boyfriend and found the job of my dreams 3 weeks later. Although I no longer have that job, I have been married for 9 years, own a house, and am in a great place. Story 35. My advice is to ensure you have solid achievements in your field before quitting your job. I used to work as an enterprise resource planning implementer. Every day, I visited different clients to train their employees on how to use the enterprise resource planning system. The pay was good, but the downside was the travel to various locations daily. After 3 years, I decided it was time to move on, so I quit. I took a 6-month break to recharge, and when I started looking for a new job, something unexpected happened. One of my former clients reached out to me. They needed an enterprise resource planning administrator, and since we had worked well together in the past, I agreed to take on the role. So, my advice is to build a strong reputation and network in your industry before stepping away from a job. Can pay off in ways you do not expect. Story 36. I worked for a uniform service company. My landlord owned a trucking company and offered to train me for free to obtain my commercial driver's license. 3 weeks later, I had a Class B license. 7 years later, I obtained my Class A license. I occasionally took over dispatch, loaded trucks, and also became the mechanic. I didn't have a plan. I was only making $350 a week with the uniform company while working over 50 hours a week. I called my wife and told her I was quitting that day. Less than a month later, I started making over 3 times more than I did at the uniform company. Story 37. I took a job after looking for work for a few months. This job was at a large ticket and events company, and while the salary was decent, it wasn't near what I was used to. There were red flags even before I started, but after 2.5 months, I decided to leave. I submitted my 2 weeks' notice and went on my pre-organized holiday. On the second day of my holiday, an old friend and colleague called and said he heard I was available. He offered me a contract at a large coffee company with a very good daily rate, which I accepted. The person who hired me was let go last year, but I'm still here almost 2 years later. Although the company is trying to bring all the existing contract roles in-house, my days are numbered since I can't become a permanent employee due to the company being based in a different country. Nonetheless, it's been a very good experience. Story 38. I ended up with several contract positions that paid much more than my permanent job, which I disliked. This continued for about 2 years until I found a contract-to-permanent position that I currently hold. In short, I now earn twice as much as I would have if I had stayed at the unpleasant job, and I also enjoy better benefits along with the flexibility of remote work. Story 39. I don't know if this counts. My work was terrible. The people there took the notion of "we are a family" to the extreme. I had no private life. I was constantly called in on my days off, and they belittled me for considering gaming a hobby. They tried to hook me up with a guy who was 10 years older than me and said things like, "My woman better not speak to me for a solid hour when I come home from work. I hate when they're clingy." He was a wonderful person. My workplace constantly assumed I was pregnant once I had a boyfriend, someone else that they didn't approve of, and made comments like, "Let yourself get punched in the stomach. We don't want to take care of your multiracial family," etc. I had a mental breakdown late one evening after a horrifying day at work. The thought of going back the next day made me hysterical. I wrote to a friend, and around 2 a.m., she told me to pack my things, come to her place, and call in sick. She helped me quit my job. I stayed with my great aunt until everything was finalized, and my brother, who lived about 8 hours away, came and picked up all my things. I moved in with him without any plans for what to do next, but a friend in our Dungeons and Dragons group mentioned that his work was hiring. I applied and got the job. I am now happily married, with our first child, and have a great job that respects my privacy and my work. Story 40. I was unemployed for a few months. I found the love of my life, moved to a new city, and found another job. I would definitely try again. Story 41. I left a toxic job where I had a fundamental philosophical difference with management about how the job should be performed, with no exit plan, over 15 years ago. I started my own business doing the same work in a way that I believed was right. I have never been happier and probably cannot work for anyone else ever again. Story 42. I spent 2 months enjoying life, then the next month stressing about finding a new job. I ended up at a much better company now where I love my work mostly. No regrets. Story 43. I was an office manager, and the administrator disliked me. She turned every small bookkeeping task into a major problem and criticized my every decision. My team was on edge and afraid of one another. The weekend receptionist quit. I attempted to smooth things over but received a lot of sass and condescension in return. Finally, I decided to leave, but it took a full week to give my notice because the administrator was hiding in her office and did not make time to speak to anyone during that week. I placed my resignation letter in her inbox outside her door before leaving on Friday afternoon. The atmosphere was icy during my last 2 weeks, but then it was over. I returned to one of my former jobs at Starbucks while buying a latte. I mentioned I needed work again, and they brought me back on a part-time basis while I continued to search for full-time employment. I found a full-time bookkeeping job that paid 20% more than the one I had quit within 6 weeks. No one at any job before or since has disliked me as much as that administrator did. I later learned that the facility was being sold to new corporate management partly due to failed administration, and the administrator had planned to make me handle the entire effort for the transition. My replacement ended up taking on the task, and the administrator was fired a few months after the transition was complete. Story 44. I ended up in a new industry with much higher pay. I never looked back, but it was stressful and took longer to get a job than I wanted. I will not pursue it again. Story 45. I quit my first job out of college because they messed up payroll twice a few weeks apart, telling us not to cash our checks for a few days due to banking issues. I put in my notice immediately the second time it happened. I transitioned from a job in a small strip mall business to a career working for a multi-state company with double the pay, benefits, and paid time off. I found the new position randomly on a job posting site. It was a great decision, and I have no complaints. I was very fortunate. Story 46. I left my toxic job in April 2024 and was unemployed for a year. I survived on a tight budget by doing side gigs and attending numerous networking sessions. Last month, I received a job offer and accepted it. The pay was quite good and higher than I expected. It is also in an industry where I have strong skills. Sometimes, when one door closes, another opens. Story 47. My former boss, who appreciated my work, retired, and I found myself with a new supervisor with whom I never connected. Shortly after, I was placed on a performance improvement plan, so I decided to resign immediately without another job lined up. It felt better than being fired. A colleague from another company, with whom I had collaborated on several projects, contacted me to let me know she had heard about my departure and offered me a job about a week later. It appears that if you consistently perform well over the years, people take notice. Story 48. My 2-year history. I had been in school completing a technology certification to switch careers at 40. I left my $47,000 per year job for a $30,000 per year position as a repair technician just to start building my resume in the tech field. The atmosphere was quite unpleasant, and I quit after about 4 months without anything lined up. However, I had a few $1,000s in savings for emergencies, which provided a cushion to feel comfortable making that decision. I immediately applied for another factory job to repair electronic devices, which paid between $30,000 and $35,000 to maintain cash flow. I was there for about 8 months and then randomly applied for a position in application support at a large healthcare cloud software company, which offered $55,000. I got that job and it is where I am now. Although my current job is not ideal, the point is that I was able to take a significant leap and was jobless for a couple of weeks, but it all worked out, ultimately leading to a job at a major cloud software company. If your bills are low enough and you have savings, taking any job in the meantime could work out well. However, if you have no savings and higher bills, and you need to maintain a specific income level, it may not be wise to quit without another opportunity lined up. Story 49. I am a nurse. I left my job because I informed my manager that I needed supplies for procedures the next day, but she disregarded my request. We were constantly running out of necessary medical supplies at the clinic where I worked. I did not give any notice because the situation was unsafe, and I was very concerned. I received 3 higher-paying job offers and secured a new position before my last paycheck arrived. That manager was terminated a couple of months later, and that clinic is now closed. Story 50. I was so frustrated with my current job that I went to human resources and resigned on the spot. I used all of my accrued vacation days, which allowed me to leave the following week. I had been applying to several other positions but had not been successful. I was trying to relocate, which added pressure to the entire process. As I was walking out of the building that day, I received a callback for the job I truly wanted in the location I desired, which I never thought I'd secure. It was a great day. Story 51. I transitioned from working at Hobby Lobby to landscaping a few years ago. I no longer feel hopeless, and that's an achievement. Story 52. I reached a salaried position in the company after more than a decade. The workload kept increasing to the point where I could not complete my job in 40 hours a week. I tried to make my supervisors aware of the situation, but received vague responses about reevaluating my duties. I was outright told that I should just work on weekends to manage my workload. Conditions continued to worsen, and during a meeting, I was assigned additional reports that would add 5 hours of work every week indefinitely. I quit the next day and took 4 months off before starting to look for a new job. I found a new position within 2 weeks of my search. Initially, I took a pay cut, but within 2 years, I am now earning over $20,000 more annually. Had I stayed at the same company, I would have only received a $4,000 increase in pay over the last 2 years. I now enjoy significantly better benefits and have gone from being stressed every day to never feeling stressed at work. It's remarkable that I am earning so much more while doing the easiest job I have ever had. I regret not making the switch sooner. Story 53. I'm not sure what you mean by backup plan, but my wife and I both quit our jobs on the same day with the intention of starting a new business. That was 20 years ago, and we are still in business. Story 54. I quit my job as a geologist during the dot-com boom. I couch-surfed in the San Francisco Bay Area and applied for jobs I was unqualified for, which paid well. I did not get a job. After a couple of months, I left, loaded up my van with a mountain bike and 2 whitewater kayaks, and spent half a year camping, biking, and paddling in the western United States. I was in Missoula, Montana, when the dot-com boom crashed. There, I made the decision to go back to school for geographic information systems and ended up at a great place to work. Well, until January 20th, 2025. It worked out for me, but I think it was a once-in-a-lifetime lesson I learned. I would never quit a job without a backup plan ever again. Story 55. I was passed over for a promotion by a colleague who had a close relationship with the boss, followed by layoffs during the COVID-19 pandemic that affected some of my best friends. I left promptly without a plan and applied to multiple jobs. I landed a position in sales training for sales associates, but the company went under almost 2 years later, due to no fault of anyone but the owner. I was unemployed for about 2 months before my family suggested that I come work with them. I have been there since. Story 56. I freelanced in my field for a while, and eventually my next opportunity came. The best decision I ever made was to leave that job without a safety net. Story 57. My ex-wife quit a well-paid job without a plan, which baffled me because I would never do that. She wanted to be her own boss, so she started and failed at multiple companies while I maintained a good job to pay the bills and cover childcare for our kids. It was quite painful. We divorced over a decade ago, and she has continued this pattern of not making any money. In fact, she consistently loses money. She has been draining her father of his finances for a long time, after also depleting mine for about 15 years. Story 58. I was working hard for a difficult employer, someone who would look for reasons to belittle you, shouting in your face with spit flying everywhere, for barely enough money to survive. This was in South Africa, where I was earning the equivalent of $387 a month. My rent was $221. I worked 6 days a week with unpaid overtime. It was all I could get. I was a restaurant floor manager at 32 years old. He hired an inexperienced 18-year-old blonde to be my co-manager. She had no knowledge of anything. Her charm seemed to work on everyone except me. She often complained, "This is too heavy to carry. Can't you do it, please?" One day, I approached my boss and said, "I am struggling with her. When she's on shift, it feels like I'm alone. She just sits around all day." But nothing changed, obviously, as they were involved with each other. The last straw came one day when I was sitting with some people at the bar. One lady whispered to me, "What does she actually do at work?" I was glad I wasn't the only one who noticed. We talked about her, and this lady mentioned that her mother was the co-manager's landlord and that she had seen her payslip. She was making more than double what I earned. I left the bar, messaged my boss. I quit, and never went back. I had no plan and panicked a little. I had a tough couple of months, and my mother, aware of how bad my job was, helped me for a while. Now, 2 years later, I was just reflecting this morning on how blessed and lucky we are. I am very aware that a higher power stepped in to improve our lives, and I am immensely grateful. Story 59. Leaving Amazon due to the toxic environment and its mental impact. I have savings and am just working part-time jobs here and there. You live and learn going with the flow. Story 60. It's interesting to see this question at this point in my life. I will be reading a lot of answers for sure. I just quit a job with no plan or idea whatsoever. It was miserable, and when I was crying multiple times over several days during work because I hated it so much, I knew I had to leave for my own mental health. I have worked for the last 9 years straight as a single mom, but recently my fiancé moved in and makes just enough to get us by until I can find what I want to do with myself. I deserve so much more than my last job, so I am willing to be broke for a little while until I can figure something out. Story 61. I left my last job and found a new position. My former boss resigned, and his supervisor contacted me to offer a return with a promotion and a pay raise. Sometimes things work out well. Story 62. I was in a miserable, toxic workplace located in a corporate town. This company was the only major employer there. There was no social life unless you had a family and were involved in youth sports. It was essentially a town of soccer dads. I had been dreaming of moving out west and finally decided to do it without a plan, relying only on my credit cards to get by. I ended up moving to a better city, met my now wife, and had 2 kids. I have no regrets, but I recognize how lucky I was. Story 63. The best thing about a difficult job is that there is always another opportunity. I quit a challenging job and decided to try waiting tables. I loved it. Story 64. As someone else mentioned, I quit all my jobs without a backup plan. Part of the reason is that I lack the motivation, energy, or time when I am already working and tend to procrastinate until I am ready to leave. There is nothing that motivates me to learn a new skill and improve like joblessness does. It may not be the wisest decision to do this without any safety net, especially as the sole breadwinner, but being open to trying new things and being determined to make a difference every time has helped me. Staying humble but eager to learn and improve is a skill you only truly develop out of necessity. I do not wallow in self-pity if something does not work out. As I have grown older, I have matured enough to be less emotional and learn to move on quickly if something doesn't pan out or if I don't get the job I hoped for. Trying again and never giving up might sound cliché, but it really conditions your mind to stay persistent. Knowing your worth, not settling, and recognizing when to move on can be challenging. I am positive and practical, so I strive to make the best of whatever I have moved on to. In a world where you are expected to continually seek higher pay and positions, I am glad I trusted my intuition to sometimes take a pay cut and move to lower positions to prioritize other aspects of life, like pursuing higher education or caring for a family member. Otherwise, I would not have done justice to my job, my team, my boss, and my subordinates. A job is just a part of life. Do not mistake it for life itself, and you will find peace. It is not the end of the world, and we may go through periods not knowing what comes next, but trust yourself to figure things out as you go, and enjoy the journey with all its highs and lows. Story 65. On pace to pay off a 30-year mortgage in 10 years. I'm not going to pretend there's a formula. It's all luck. Story 66. In late 2022, after a little over a decade, I quit my job in retail. It was a job I generally liked for most of those years, but dealing with the public every day, especially during COVID-19, began to wear on me. I was honestly starting to experience significant waves of depression and felt like a bitter shell of a person. So I quit and gave myself 2 months to do nothing. No commitments, no plans, nothing. It may sound obvious, but my mental state benefited greatly from this. All the stress I felt from that job slowly melted away. Those 2 months were truly like a mental reset I never knew I needed. Luckily, I had saved enough money to do this. Otherwise, I would not recommend it. Coincidentally, right before those 2 months were up, a friend got me a job where he was working, and now, almost 3 years later, I am their marketing specialist. I am making the most money I have ever made in my life, still not enough in this economy. Enjoying the work, and I was able to buy my first house. Also, for anyone out there who wants a fresh start, you might be surprised by the variety of jobs available. Many companies today do not require degrees. Keep an open mind, and you might find something you did not even know existed. Story 67. I moved 1,500 miles away from my home of 38 years. I didn't have a job yet, but I was confident I could find one. After 6 months, I secured a position with a team I truly adored. I faced a significant loss from one of my colleagues right before I transitioned to another job. I experienced and learned a great deal, and I don't regret anything. Story 68. The first company I worked for had a branch in a different state, and a handful of us moved to Virginia for the new branch. After working there for a couple of years, the company sent out an email stating that since we had not expressed a desire to move back to the home office, 70 miles away in another state, we were being let go at the end of December. The issue was that the company president, who worked with us in the branch, forgot to inform us. I was so frustrated that I stormed into his office and told him I quit effective immediately. This was a Friday, and he refused to accept my resignation, advising me to take the weekend to think it over. He also mentioned that our positions would still be available if we wanted to return to the home office. On Monday morning, I printed my official resignation and told him Thursday would be my last day, making this an arbitrary decision. That same day, my friend, who worked in the office next to mine, received a call from a recruiter for a job 30 miles away. He didn't want to travel that far, so he transferred the recruiter to my phone. The next day, I went for my interview during my lunch break, and by the time I returned to the office, the recruiter called to say they wanted to hire me. This was the only time I quit on a whim like that, and I had almost no money and no backup plan. I just got really lucky with the timing of the interview. Story 69. I was put on a performance review at my retail job. I disliked it, so I quit that day. I found another job that paid several dollars more. The new job was 10 times better as well. This experience shows that sometimes the universe pushes you for a reason. Story 70. I am currently navigating a transitional period. I am feeling burnt out from bar management and decided that anything was better than spending another summer working 80 hours a week for $70,000. It has been 3 weeks since I left my job. I am currently covering shifts at the bar I quit, my friend's bar, a random bar in the suburbs, and I have been offered 2 jobs. None of the jobs are ideal, and I probably won't stay at any of them long term, but I am already making more each week than I was before. Honestly, working somewhere different every day keeps things fresh. If I can maintain this pace, I will continue covering shifts until I finish my project management course, after which I will seek an office job. Story 71. I relocated about 5 hours away after being in one place for 8 months, and before that, I had seasonal work. I moved here and have only been unemployed for about 2 weeks in the last 14 years, 13 of which were at the same company. Story 72. More than 10 years ago, the work was acceptable, but the team I was part of wasn't thriving. I didn't really feel that it was the right fit for me. Fortunately, they were laying off employees for 2 weeks, so I asked them to let me go instead, which they did. The next 6 months of being unemployed were the best times I've had since high school. I recharged and enjoyed my life. Towards the end of that 6 months, I received a call saying they heard I was available and that I would be a perfect fit for their team. I decided to give it a chance, and it has been great. We have a cohesive team of people, and I love working there. I have been employed there for over 10 years. I still don't know who informed on me. Story 73. I gave over a month of notice and had many prospects lined up, so I thought I would find something quickly. I worked my last day on March 6, 2020. Then the world shut down and all my prospects disappeared. For months later, I found out I was pregnant. I couldn't find a job during that time, so I had the baby, took maternity leave, and finally found a great job in 2022. Story 74. When I signed my contract at my retail job, it stated that all bank holidays were included in my holiday allowance, as I didn't work weekends. This was the case for 8 years. Then in August 2023, management decided it meant we were allowed to book bank holidays off, but only half each year and switch the year after. At the time, there were only about 23 people on this contract, as it had changed over the years for new employees. It was only affecting us older staff members. I was 21 when I got the job and was 29 at this point, but we collectively decided we would quit if this policy was made official. In October, they asked us which bank holidays we wanted for the following holiday allowance, and I was scheduled to work both Boxing Day and the day after New Year's. Since I don't drive, my bus doesn't run on bank holidays, and taxis charge double during these times. I played along, accepted my hours, and went about my business for the next couple of weeks. One person from the group quit mid-November, and I handed in my notice letter on December 8th, stating my final day would be the 20th. On my final day, management claimed I hadn't given them notice at all and could refuse my letter. I still walked out after completing my hours and returned the next day during what would have been my working hours to shop instead. I took a month off to address my mental health, which I didn't realize was suffering. After many rejections and 0 interviews, I had to sign up for government benefits as my savings had dried up. During this time, they noticed how anxious I was and provided me with additional support. 2 months after signing up for the benefits program, I had an interview for a morning cleaning position in a school, and 4 hours after the interview, I was offered the job. Because of the additional support, they provided me with some money to help pay for the bike I needed to get to work. Next month, I will have been there a year, and since April, I've interviewed for a second shift in the afternoon and secured that position as well. I'm happier than I've been in years, working side by side with my supervisor and getting along well with her, my team leader, and most of my colleagues. I actually enjoy going to work now. I'm fitter because of the commute there and back twice a day and the manual labor. It's hard work and it can be physically demanding at times, but I wouldn't change anything, at least for a while. No one else quit, by the way. Only that first person and I, out of 23 total, actually followed through with it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.